May 1st, 1945. In Hitler's Berlin bunker, 6 children in white nightgowns were given morphine and then cyanide. Magda Goebbels believed her children had no future in post-war Germany, so she killed them, even though offers to evacuate them had been made. This horror was not the end. It was the beginning of what became of the children of Nazi leaders after World War II. Some clung to their father's evil, others tried to break free, but all were trapped by a legacy no one could escape. What did it do to them, and what price did they pay for a crime they never chose? Inside the homes of Nazi leaders, childhood unfolded behind high walls and heavy drapes. The Goebbels children called Hitler Uncle, climbing onto his lap during visits, their laughter echoing through the marble corridors of the Reich chancellery. Gudrun Himmler, known as Peppi, was flown from Munich to Berlin by private plane, her father Heinrich sending her letters every week, each one filled with careful script and fatherly pride. He called her every few days, even as the war closed in, shielding her from the world outside. Privilege is what kept them safe for a time. Martin Bormann Jr., nicknamed Kronzi, the Crown Prince, grew up with Adolf Hitler as his godfather, his place in the Nazi pantheon sealed in the party's official registry. Photographs show him at garden parties and military reviews, a boy surrounded by generals and ministers, never far from the center of power. Etta Goering spent her earliest years at Karenhall, a private estate filled with art and rare animals, the daughter of Hermann Goering, who ruled the Luftwaffe from behind velvet curtains. Center and ceremony defined their days. Rudolf Hess's children played in the gardens of the commandant's villa at Auschwitz, their games unfolding just yards from the gas chambers. Years later, a family member remembered being told to wash strawberries because they smelled of ash from the ovens. For these children, the world beyond the gates was a rumor, the violence and suffering invisible, hidden by distance and deliberate silence. In 1941, Gudrun visited Dachau with her father, later insisting she never saw any atrocities. Silence was the shield that kept the truth away. Their days were filled with privilege, servants, tutors, and holidays in the Alps. The war felt far away, its true cost kept from their eyes. Childhood innocence was preserved by design, even as the machinery of genocide ran nearby. For a time, the children of Nazi leaders lived untouched, their lives a bubble of comfort and routine, unaware of the reckoning that would soon come crashing through their doors. Reckoning would arrive, and with it, an end to the protected worlds they had known. Collapse arrived without warning. In the final weeks of the war, Berlin became a city of locked doors and drawn curtains, its silence broken by the sound of gunfire, and more often, by the absence that followed. As Soviet troops closed in, thousands of German civilians, parents, children, entire families, took their own lives. In some towns, local death registers recorded hundreds of suicides in just a few days. Police and hospital reports from Berlin speak of thousands more, though the true number will never be known. Among the dead were scores of Nazi officials and their families, unwilling to face capture or justice. For the children of the Reich's elite, the fall was swift and bewildering. The walls that had protected them became prison gates. Allied soldiers arrived, not as distant rumors, but as men with lists and orders. The children of Joseph Goebbels were already gone, murdered in the bunker. Others were seized in the Alps, in farmhouses, or in hiding places arranged by desperate parents. Gudrun Himmler, just 15, was taken into British custody with her mother. She spent years moving from camp to camp, interrogated about her father's network, asked over and over about names, meetings, and secrets she could barely comprehend. When news came that Heinrich Himmler had bitten down on a cyanide capsule in British custody, Gudrun suffered a psychological collapse that left her changed for life. Etta Goering and her mother were transferred through a string of Allied internment camps, summoned to Nuremberg to face the reality of their father's crimes. Martin Bormann's children were rounded up in the Alps and in Italy, questioned about their father's escape. Rudolf Hess's family was detained and pressured to reveal his hiding place, the threat of arrest hanging over each answer. In makeshift barracks and interrogation rooms, these teenagers were forced to confront the world outside their childhood bubble. Some were called to testify as witnesses, their memories of garden parties and family dinners now evidence in war crimes investigations. The psychic wounds. From those months, fear, shame, confusion became the foundation for the lives they would build in the shadow of their father's crimes. In the ruins of post-war Germany, a new kind of network began to quietly take shape. Stille Hilfe, known as Silent Help, was founded in November 1951, but its roots stretched back to secret relief efforts for Nazi prisoners and fugitives as early as 1946. At its center stood Gudrun Himmler, orchestrating support with the precision of a strategist. The organization's ledgers, preserved in German archives, reveal a disciplined system. Donations from wealthy sympathizers and conservative church circles flowed into well-guarded accounts. Six-figure annual sums were not uncommon. Officially registered as a charitable group, Stille Hilfe offered donors tax deductions for their contributions, further boosting its war chest. Funds were not just for legal fees. The organization paid for forged documents, travel expenses, and medical care for fugitive Nazis across Europe and South America. Lawyers on the payroll drafted clemency petitions, while families of convicted war criminals received holiday bonuses and regular support payments. Stille Hilfe's reach extended into the cells and courtrooms of post-war Europe. When Klaus Barbie, called the Butcher of Lyon, faced arrest in Bolivia, Stille Hilfe's legal team mobilized to delay extradition and funnel money for his defense. Martin Sommer, notorious for his brutality at Buchenwald, received similar backing. The evidence is not just in names and numbers. Ledger entries, correspondence, and trial records document the flow of money and influence. The organization's connections ran through monasteries, shipping lines, and diplomatic channels, weaving a clandestine safety net for some of the most wanted men in the world. The machinery of impunity was not a relic of the past, but a living, evolving system, one that operated in the open for decades, hidden in plain sight behind the language of charity and care. Gudrun Himmler's loyalty was never just a private conviction. Her presence at underground SS gatherings in Austria drew former officers like moths to a flame. At these reunions, she moved through the crowd as if born to the role, always wearing the silver swastika brooch her father had given her. Photographs from the 1970s show Gudrun at the center of tables, flanked by men in dark suits, hands raised in silent toasts, the old insignia pinned discreetly to lapels. She was treated as a living relic of the Reich, addressed with deference, her opinions sought on matters of memory and justice. In the early 1960s, Gudrun entered the West German intelligence service under an assumed name. For 2 years, she worked as a secretary inside the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the BND. According to research by the service's own historians, her employment ended quietly in 1963 when her unwavering ties to far-right circles became impossible to ignore. She was dismissed, but the episode revealed how easily the children of Nazi leaders slipped into the new state's institutions until their loyalties surfaced. Stille Hilfe's reach extended beyond fugitives on the run. Anton Maleth, notorious for beating prisoners at Theresienstadt, spent his last years in a luxury nursing home near Munich, his care paid for by the organization. Maleth's case was no anomaly. Gudrun and her circle ensured that even the most infamous names found comfort and support, shielded from public scrutiny. The old loyalties did not fade. They adapted, thriving in the shadows of post-war Germany. For Gudrun Himmler and those who gathered around her, the war had ended, but the cause endured, stitched into every gesture and every carefully chosen word. Martin Bormann Jr. was born into the heart of the Nazi hierarchy. His second name, Adolf, a tribute to his godfather. As a child, he moved through the world as the so-called Crown Prince, a favored son in Hitler's inner circle, shaped by ritual, privilege, and the certainty of ideology. But in 1945, as the Third Reich collapsed, Bormann Jr. was given false identity papers and hidden by a Catholic farmer in the Austrian Alps. His mother died the next year in Allied custody. Alone, cut off from the world, aught that had defined him, he began to question everything he had been taught. In 1946, Bormann Jr. converted to Catholicism, rejecting the anti-Christian dogma his father had enforced. The transformation was public. He entered the priesthood, and by 1958, he was ordained, his new faith a clear break with the past. He kept his name, Martin Adolf Bormann, never hiding from the legacy he carried. In the early 1960s, he volunteered as a missionary in the Belgian Congo, arriving in a country torn by the Simba rebellion. The violence there was raw and immediate, a world away from the calculated cruelty of his father's regime, yet the suffering he witnessed left its own mark. Years later, he left the priesthood and married a former nun, Cordula. He traveled and spoke to German schoolchildren about the horrors of the Third Reich, and he visited Israel, meeting Holocaust survivors face to face. For decades, he sought to atone, using his story as a warning, but redemption proved elusive. In 2011, a former student accused him of sexual abuse dating back to the 1960s. The case was never resolved because dementia had already taken hold. He died in 2013, still bearing the name Martin Adolf Bormann. His life a long and public struggle with the weight of inherited guilt. His journey raised questions that faith or confession alone could not answer. Rainer Höss was born carrying a name that drew stares and suspicion long before he understood its weight. At 15, a class trip took him through the gates of Dachau, where a plaque spelled out the crimes of Rudolf Höss, his grandfather. The text named him as the architect of mass murder. Rainer called his father for an explanation. The answer came as a lie. His father said it was just a spelling error, a confusion with Rudolf Hess. But the truth was waiting in the attic. Hidden books, trial documents, and the memoirs of Auschwitz's commandant. Rainer read them in secret, piecing together a family legacy built on ash and denial. He left home that same day, breaking ties with his father and siblings. Years later, a Holocaust survivor confronted him at a public event. "You look like your grandfather," she said, and Rainer felt the blow land. He began wearing a Star of David necklace, a daily act of defiance against his own bloodline. He traveled to schools and memorials, speaking openly about shame and inherited guilt. "I carry the guilt with me in my mind," he told audiences. "I am ashamed for what my grandfather did to thousands of families." His activism turned him into an outcast within his own family. His aunt called him a liar, a traitor, a fame-seeker. It was proof that breaking the silence comes at a price. Nicholas Frank's war was different, but no less relentless. Each night he imagined executing his parents anew, replaying his father's last moments on the gallows at Nuremberg. Hans Frank, the so-called Butcher of Poland, had raised his son in privilege and ideology, then left him only horror. Nicholas wrote, "The snapping of your neck spared me from a totally screwed-up life." In interviews and in his book, he called his father that sweet-talking slimehole of a Hitler fanatic with that little piggy bat snout. He visited schools, urging students to remember not just the crimes, but the willingness of ordinary people to look away. Even after years of public condemnation, Nicholas admitted, "Never a day he did not pop up in my brain." Both men tried to break the chain, one by cutting all ties, the other by waging a nightly battle against memory. Neither found peace. For the descendants who denounced their lineage, the cost was isolation, suspicion, and the knowledge that some stains never wash out. In 1977, Rolf Mengele stepped off a plane in Brazil, carrying questions that had haunted him for years. He was 33, a lawyer by trade, and for more than 2 decades, had lived with only rumors of his father's whereabouts. Josef Mengele, Auschwitz's angel of death, waited for him in a modest house on Rua Alvarenga, hidden behind overgrown hedges at the city's edge. The reunion lasted about 2 weeks. Each night, Josef insisted Rolf take his bed, while he slept on a thin mattress on the floor. Father and son circled each other in cramped rooms, their conversations thick with the weight of history. Rolf pressed his father about Auschwitz. He wanted the truth about the selections, the experiments, the twins. Joseph's answers were chillingly calm. "I had to do my duty," he said. "The twins owed their lives to me. I never harmed anyone." There was no apology, no flicker of remorse. Rolf listened as his father described his actions as medical necessity, not murder. The justifications sounded rehearsed, hollow, impossible to accept. Rolf later called it against every ethic and moral and human understanding. No apology. Yet beneath the anger, another force held him back. Rolf knew the world wanted justice, but he could not bring himself to turn in his own father. No one can demand that of a son, he said. The 2 weeks ended with nothing resolved. Joseph unrepentant, Rolf torn between horror and blood loyalty. When he left Brazil, the secret of his father's hiding place remained safe. The confrontation had changed nothing, except to make the silence between them permanent. Joseph Mengele slipped beneath the surface of a shallow Brazilian stream on February 7, 1979. Witnesses later reported he suffered a stroke while swimming and drowned before anyone could reach him. For 6 years, his family and the network that sheltered him kept the truth hidden. The world continued to search for the angel of death, not knowing his grave already lay beneath a false name in a quiet cemetery outside Sao Paulo. In 1985, the secret unraveled. Acting on a tip, Brazilian police exhumed a grave marked Wolfgang Gerhard. The forensic team, working under intense international scrutiny, recovered skeletal remains and dental records. Rolf Mengele, now in his 40s, flew to Brazil to identify the body, and he confirmed the jaw and teeth as his father's. The official police report, signed and sealed that summer, closed the file on one of the most wanted men of the 20th century. The findings were irrefutable. Joseph Mengele had died a free man, never brought to trial, never forced to answer for the selections at Auschwitz or the deaths of thousands of children. For 6 years, the silence had protected not just Mengele, but also the families who had risked everything to hide him. Rolf Mengele, torn between disgust and loyalty, kept the final secret until the authorities arrived. The exhumation ended the hunt, but not the questions. Justice had been denied. The world would never see Joseph Mengele in the dock, and the legacy of his crimes lingered, unresolved, in the lives of those who bore his name. Inherited guilt doesn't fade with time. It shapes identities, choices, and generations. Today, studies confirm trauma and stigma linger long after the crime's end, forcing descendants to confront questions society never fully answers. The burden of a name can outlast justice itself. In a world still scarred by inherited hatred, how we judge the children of perpetrators reveals who we choose to become. Share your thoughts below.